I want you to close your eyes for a second and just place yourself in one of the most violent, unforgiving environments on the face of the earth.
Oh, this is going to be bleak, isn't it?
It really is. So it is the dawn of January 31st, 1921. You are a United States Coast Guard lookout, right? Standing on the freezing, wind-whipped sand of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina.
And for those who don't know, that specific area is legendary.
Yeah, exactly. You're peering out into a stretch of ocean so notoriously deadly, so, choked with the submerged skeletons of thousands of vessels, that for centuries it's just been known as the graveyard of the Atlantic.
A completely earned title, by the way.
Completely. And the wind right now is howling at 90 miles per hour. It's not just a sound. I mean, it is a deafening physical force.
It's the kind of wind that makes it actively difficult to just draw breath into your lungs.
Right. It's driving this freezing, salt-heavy sea spray into your eyes, and it's stinging like shattered glass. And out there in the churning pre-dawn gloom, the ocean is throwing up these waves that they don't even really look like water anymore.
Yeah, they look like moving mountain ranges.
Exactly. Huge, gray, rolling monoliths that, routinely snap modern steel-hulled vessels entirely in half, and then out of that freezing mist, a silhouette begins to emerge.
And it is a staggering thing to witness, especially in those conditions.
Yeah.
Because it's an absolute leviathan.
It really is. It's a massive wooden ship.
A ship so big it almost defies the logic of the era, Yet out here, in the teeth of this gale, it is completely swallowed by the scale of the storm.
Yeah, it's a 5-masted schooner. Just a towering fortress of timber and canvas. But as it gets closer to the treacherous outer sandbars, the diamond shoals, you wipe the salt from your eyes and realize something is, well, deeply foundationally wrong.
Because of the sails, right?
Yes, the sails are fully set, all of them. They are billowing wildly, just recklessly straining against these hurricane-force winds in a way that threatens to tear the masts right out of the deck.
Which, no sane captain would ever have full sails up in a gale like this.
Never. The ship isn't fighting the storm. It isn't trying to steer away from the roaring breakers. It's just surrendering.
Just letting the ocean take it.
Yeah. And as you squint through the gray light, this creeping cold dread washes over you. It settles in the pit of your stomach because there is absolutely no one at the helm.
Nobody at all.
The decks are totally, completely empty. This massive ship is sailing itself into oblivion.
It is the manifestation of the ultimate maritime nightmare, honestly.
It really is.
A vessel that is technically alive, moving with terrifying speed and purpose, but entirely devoid of the human souls meant to guide it. A ghost ship in the most literal, terrifying sense of the word.
Welcome to the deep dive. And I know that opening sounded like the prologue to like a Stephen King novel, but I need to make something perfectly clear right at the top.
Yeah, this isn't fiction.
No, everything we just described and everything we are about to discuss today is pulled directly from actual government investigations, Coast Guard logs, and library archives from 1921.
Real historical documents.
Right. Today, we are unpacking a meticulously documented, real-life maritime horror story. We're reconstructing the final terrifying days of the Carroll Deering, and we are bringing you along for the ride.
And I think the true terror of the Deering story, it doesn't require us to believe in the supernatural.
Not at all.
Right, like, we don't need phantom sailors or ancient curses to be terrified by what happened here. The horror is rooted entirely in the cold, hard mechanics of isolation.
Oh, absolutely. It's about the sheer, indifferent scale of the ocean.
Yeah, a force that strips away every single ounce of human hubris, leaving us completely vulnerable to the elements and, perhaps much more frighteningly vulnerable to each other.
Yeah, I was actually trying to figure out how to accurately contextualize this feeling for you, the listener, because, most of us will never set foot on a 1920 sailing vessel.
Right, it's a very alien environment to us now.
Exactly. And I realized that a ship at sea is kind of the ultimate locked room thriller.
Oh, I like that analogy. That's good.
Think about it. If you are in a house and something goes horribly wrong, like a fire breaks out or someone's mind snaps or, a violent intruder gets in, you have an escape valve.
You can just run out the front door.
Right. You can flee into the street and scream for help. But if something goes wrong 100 miles offshore, there is no street. There is no front door.
You are confined to a floating wooden box.
Yes, completely surrounded by an abyss of freezing water that is actively trying to kill you. You are locked in with your absolute darkest fears, and you cannot leave.
It's an incredibly claustrophobic reality, despite being surrounded by the open expanse of the ocean.
Yeah, it's a paradox.
And the pressure inside that wooden box can build to catastrophic levels, entirely unseen by the rest of the world. So, to even begin to understand the terrifying end of the Carroll Deering, we have to understand the pressure cooker itself
Right, we have to look at the environment of the vessel.
and the incredibly fragile, ultimately doomed human dynamics that were trapped aboard her.
So let's go back and look at the genesis of this machine. The year is 1919. The Carroll Deering is built in Bath, Maine by the G.G. Deering Company.
And the owner, George G. Deering, actually names this ship after his own son.
Which tells you a bit about the pride they had in this vessel.
Oh, absolutely.
And we really need to emphasize the physical reality of this ship. When you hear wooden sailing ship, you might picture like a pirate ship from a movie or a sleek little racing yacht.
Yeah, people think of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Exactly. But no, this was an industrial beast. It was a commercial vessel designed to haul massive, crushing loads of raw coal across the globe.
It was essentially a floating warehouse. I mean, to give you a sense of scale, a 5-masted schooner like the Deering is roughly 250 feet long.
That is massive.
It is. The masts themselves are these towering pillars of timber reaching over 100 feet into the air, supporting an absolute labyrinth of heavy canvas sails and thick hemp rigging.
So it's complicated too.
Very. The Deering represented the absolute pinnacle of large commercial sailing vessels. But it's crucial to understand that it was built right at the twilight of the sail era.
Right, because of steam.
Yeah, by 1919, steam-powered ships were rapidly taking over the global shipping lanes.
So this ship is almost a dinosaur the day it launches. A beautiful, massive dinosaur, sure, but still representing a dying way of life.
Precisely. And a ship of that size carrying a heavy, dangerous cargo like coal, it requires an incredible amount of grueling physical labor.
And precise coordination, right?
Absolutely. And above all else, absolute discipline. A 5-masted schooner is a complex, dangerous machine. The crew is the engine.
Right.
If the engine loses its timing or if the components start grinding against each other, the machine dies.
And initially, the engine is humming perfectly. The maiden voyages of the Deering go incredibly well. She's been in service for about a year, proving herself to be a fast, capable ship when she begins her final doomed voyage in July of 1920.
So she's not a cursed ship from day one or anything?
Yeah. No, not at all. She leaves Puerto Rico, arrives in Newport News, Virginia, to pick up this massive cargo of coal that is bound for Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
A very standard run.
Exactly. And at this point, the ship is in fantastic hands. The captain is a man named William H. Merritt.
And Captain Merritt is the exact kind of man you want running your locked room.
He really is. He is a highly respected, seasoned mariner and a legitimate World War I hero.
Yeah, his backstory is wild. Just 2 years prior, in 1918, his previous command, which was another massive Deering-built 5-masted schooner named the Dorothy B. Barrett, was actively hunted and sunk by a German U-boat off the coast of New Jersey.
Wait, really? A U-boat?
Yes, it's a harrowing story in its own right. Under direct artillery fire from the submarine, Merritt managed to keep his head, organize an evacuation, and save his entire crew.
Wow.
He was cited for exceptional bravery, so he is the quintessential strong, capable, universally trusted captain.
He's the guy you want in a crisis.
Yeah.
And he brings his son, Sewell Merritt, on board to act as his first mate.
Which is great for morale.
Yeah, it immediately establishes this rock-solid chain of command built on deep personal trust. Below them is a crew of 10 men, entirely Scandinavian, mostly from Denmark.
Right, experienced sailors.
So you have this united command structure, a proven hero at the helm, and a capable crew. They clear the Virginia Capes in late August, heading south for Brazil. The locked room is secure.
But
then, fate intervenes. And it intervenes in the most mundane yet devastating way possible. Captain Merritt falls ill.
And not just seasick.
No, deathly ill.
Deep ill.
It gets so severe that they cannot risk continuing into the open Atlantic. They have to turn this massive, fully loaded ship around and limp into the port of Lewes, Delaware, just to drop off Captain Merritt and his son.
This is the pivot point. This right here is where the foundation of the tragedy is poured.
Because now the company is panicking.
Oh, absolutely. The G.G. Deering Company is suddenly in a desperate situation. They have a massive asset loaded with thousands of tons of coal sitting completely idle in Delaware, bleeding money by the hour.
Because every day the ship doesn't move, the profit margin shrinks.
Exactly. They need a captain, and they need one immediately. They don't have the luxury of thoroughly vetting a replacement or, finding someone the crew already knows and respects.
So they scramble. Enter the fateful replacements. The company reaches out and recruits Captain Willis B. Wormel to take command.
And this is where the dynamic of the ship violently shifts from a well-oiled machine to a ticking time bomb.
Tell him about Wormel.
Well, Captain Wormel is 66 years old. Now, he's a veteran sea captain. He definitely has experience. He had actually retired, but he was lured back for this one last lucrative run.
Which sounds nice, but...
But there's a glaring, terrifying physical vulnerability here. For a man who is supposed to navigate a vessel thousands of miles across the open ocean, Wormel has a massive liability. His eyesight is rapidly failing.
And we really have to unpack the mechanics of navigation in the 1920s to understand why that is so dangerous, don't we?
We do. There is no GPS. There is no radar.
Right.
Navigating a ship across the Atlantic Ocean required immense precision using celestial navigation. You had to use a sextant to measure the exact angle between the horizon and a celestial body, the sun, the moon, or a specific star.
Which is incredibly tedious math.
Oh, yeah. You had to take that incredibly precise optical measurement, cross-reference it with a chronometer tracking Greenwich Mean Time, and perform complex mathematical calculations just to figure out where you were on a completely featureless expanse of water.
So if your eyesight is failing...
You literally cannot see the horizon clearly enough to use the sextant. You cannot read the fine print on the navigational charts. A captain who cannot see is a captain who is blind to the world and therefore entirely dependent on others to guide his ship.
Which means his authority is fundamentally compromised before he even steps foot on the deck.
Exactly. Historically, a captain's authority at sea is absolute. I mean, he is the law, the judge, and the jury.
But that authority rests entirely on competence, doesn't it?
100%. The crew has to believe that the captain knows exactly what he is doing, that he is the one keeping them alive. When a captain is physically compromised, when he cannot perform the most essential life-saving duty of navigating the vessel, his authority immediately begins to crack.
And the Deering Company knew this, right?
They did. To fill that crack, to compensate for Wormel's failing eyes, they bring on a new first mate to assist him, a man named Charles B. McClellan.
So let's look at the board now. The locked room has been completely rearranged.
It's a mess.
You have a 66-year-old retired captain who can barely see. You have a brand new first mate, McClellan, brought in at the last possible second.
Right.
And you have a crew of 10 Scandinavian sailors who have just watched their heroic, trusted commander, the guy who survived a U-boat attack, get carried off the ship sick.
They don't know Wormel. They don't know McClellan.
It is a textbook recipe for total institutional decay. At sea, trust is the only real currency, you know.
Yes. Wormel didn't hire these 10 sailors. McClellan didn't hire them. There is no pre-existing loyalty, no shared history, no mutual respect.
They are strangers, forced into an incredible high-stakes, physically punishing environment under a cobbled-together command structure that is inherently flawed.
Yet, against all odds, they set sail on September 8th, 1920.
And miraculously, the physical trip to Brazil is actually successful. They cross the Atlantic, they arrive in Rio de Janeiro, they deliver the massive load of coal without incident.
But the physical journey is just a smokescreen.
Yeah. The psychological journey, what is happening inside the minds of these men, is where the real horror is taking root.
Because in Rio, Captain Wormel gives his crew shore leave, which is standard. But he also meets up with an old friend of his, a Captain Goodwin, who happens to be docked in the same port.
And this encounter is incredibly revealing and, frankly, terrifying. Because it gives us a documented glimpse into the psychological decay happening aboard the Deering.
What did he say to Goodwin?
Wormel sits down with Captain Goodwin and openly, bitterly complains about his own crew. He speaks of them with just utter disdain. He tells Goodwin that out of the entire crew of the Deering, the only man he actually trusts, the only man he feels any kinship with, is his engineer, a man named Herbert Bates.
Wow. As someone who has managed teams before, I mean, that is such a massive red flag.
Oh, totally. If you are the boss, and you are literally hundreds of miles away from any form of civilization or law enforcement, and you openly despise the people working under you, that is suicidal.
It is incredibly dangerous. A captain must maintain a professional distance, sure, but he cannot alienate himself to the point of open contempt.
Because they notice.
In the isolated vacuum of a ship at sea, a captain who isolates himself socially and emotionally becomes a target. He becomes the other. The crew aren't fools. They can feel when they are despised.
Yeah, and when the crew realizes that the captain holds them in contempt, their inherent obligation to respect his authority just evaporates. It becomes an us versus him dynamic.
And if Wormel's relationship with the general crew was bad, his relationship with his first mate, Charles McClellan, was a lit stick of dynamite.
Oh, man. Yes. So they leave Rio in early December, heading back north toward the United States, and they make a stop for supplies in Barbados.
And this is where the tension, which has been simmering for months, finally boils over into open hostility.
Right. It's December 1920. First Mate McClellan goes ashore in Barbados, heads straight for a place called the Continental Cafe, and proceeds to get incredibly, recklessly drunk.
Alcohol, isolation, and deep-seated resentment are a highly volatile mix, especially for a sailor who has been bottled up on a ship for weeks.
So while drinking at the cafe, McClellan runs into another ship's captain, a man named Hugh Norton, who commands the ship Snow. And McClellan just unloads.
He begins to vent his profound, venomous bitterness to anyone who will listen.
He's furious. He tells Captain Norton that he's the only one doing the actual work on the Deering. He explicitly states that he has to do all the navigation, all the charting, all the math because of Captain Wormel's bad eyes.
So McClellan feels he is carrying the entire survival of the ship on his shoulders.
Exactly. But at the same time, he claims Wormel is constantly looking over his shoulder, constantly interfering with his attempts to discipline the crew.
So McClellan is trapped in this infuriating limbo, right?
Yeah, he is doing the captain's job, but he is being constantly undermined and treated like an underling by an old, half-blind man.
What you're seeing here is a catastrophic breakdown of power dynamics. McClellan holds the functional power. He is the one who can actually navigate the ship and keep them off the rocks.
Right.
But Wormel holds the titular power. He is the captain, backed by maritime law and the company.
And that discrepancy almost always creates deep, festering resentment.
McClellan feels he has earned the respect and the absolute authority of command, but he doesn't have the title. He views Wormel not as a superior, but as an incompetent, frustrating obstacle.
And then the dam breaks. In that drunken rage at the Continental Cafe, standing in front of Captain Norton and several other witnesses, McClellan issues a chilling, explicit, thoroughly documented threat.
What did he say?
He says, and I quote verbatim from the historical record, "I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk, I will."
You cannot misinterpret that.
No.
It is premeditated malice. He is openly broadcasting his intent to commit mutiny, or murder, or both. He is telling the world that Captain Wormel will not survive the voyage home.
Now, because he is causing such a massive scene, and because he is so wildly drunk, McClellan is arrested by the local authorities in Barbados.
Good.
Right? He is thrown into a jail cell to sober up. And this is the part of the story that forces me to just stop and stare at the wall, because the psychology of what happens next is baffling.
It really makes no sense.
Captain Willis Wormel, the man McClellan just publicly threatened to get, makes a decision. On January 9th, Wormel walks down to the jail, pays the bail to get McClellan out, brings him back aboard the Carroll Deering, and orders the ship to set sail for Hampton Roads, Virginia.
I mean, from a modern, rational perspective, it defies all logic. You have a man who has sworn to kill you, who is sitting in a jail cell where he can't hurt you, and you choose to pay money to bring him back into your locked room.
Right. I have spent hours trying to put myself in Wormel's shoes here. Why on earth would you do that?
It's only one reason.
The only thing that makes sense to me is absolute crushing desperation. Was Wormel's eyesight so bad that he literally became a hostage to his own ship?
Most likely, yes.
Did he stand there in Barbados and realize, I cannot see the stars, I cannot read the charts. If I leave McClellan in this jail cell, I have to wire the Deering Company and tell them I am physically incapable of sailing their massive ship home.
Did his pride or his fear of losing his career force him to bring his own executioner back on board?
That is almost certainly the grim reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Wormel was trapped by his own physical limitations. To leave his navigator behind meant admitting total defeat.
So he made a calculated, albeit disastrous risk. Perhaps he rationalized it. He might have thought the threat was just drunken bluster that McClellan would forget when sober.
People do that all the time.
Yeah. Perhaps he thought he could maintain control once they were back in the rigid structure of life at sea. But the terrifying truth is that by bringing McClellan back aboard and ordering those sails raised, Wormel effectively sealed the locked room from the inside.
Knowing full well the killer was already in the house.
Exactly.
So picture it, January 9th, 1921. The Deering sails out of Barbados. You have a crew of Scandinavian sailors who are alienated and resentful. You have a first mate who has publicly sworn a blood oath against the captain.
And you have an old, partially blind captain who trusts no one but his engineer.
They sail out into the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, and for almost 3 weeks, they vanish from the historical record.
We have absolutely no idea what conversations were had, what fights broke out, or what blood was spilled during those days in the deep ocean.
None. But we do know exactly how they reemerged. Let's move chronologically into the final sightings.
Because this is where things get really weird.
Yeah, we are transitioning now from this simmering psychological threat in the Caribbean to the chilling, unexplained, and deeply wrong encounters off the coast of the Carolinas.
This is where the timeline of dread really accelerates. The psychological pressure cooker has finally popped, and the evidence begins to spill out into the open.
The date is January 28th, 1921. Reconstruct this scene with me. The Carroll A. Deering hails the Cape Lookout lightship off the coast of North Carolina.
Now, for those who don't know, a lightship is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's a floating lighthouse.
Right.
In areas where the water is too deep or the shoals are too shifting to build a brick lighthouse, the government would anchor a ship with massive lights on it to warn other vessels away from the shallow waters.
So the keeper of this specific lightship, a veteran mariner named Captain Jacobson, watches this massive 5-masted schooner pull near. And a man on the deck of the Deering picks up a megaphone and yells across the water to him.
But the man holding the megaphone is what makes this entire encounter so deeply, fundamentally unsettling.
Tell him why.
Well, Captain Jacobson takes careful note of the man. He reports that the man shouting was tall, thin, had reddish hair, and spoke with a distinct, thick, foreign accent.
And what makes my skin crawl about that description, tall, thin, red hair, foreign accent, is that it is definitively not Captain Willis Wormel.
Nor is it First Mate McClellan.
No. It doesn't sound or act like any officer would.
It violates every known rule of maritime protocol. When you are hailing another vessel, especially a government-operated lightship, to pass on an official message regarding the status of your ship, that communication is the strict, exclusive purview of the captain. Or, if the captain is incapacitated, the first mate.
Right. A random foreign crewman grabbing a megaphone and shouting official business to a government vessel is wildly irregular.
It implies that the normal chain of command has been completely severed.
So the red-haired man yells through the megaphone that the Deering had lost its anchors in a severe storm off Cape Fear, and he asks Captain Jacobson to please wire a message to the ship's owners, the G.G. Deering Company, to let them know.
Now, tragically, the lightship's radio was dead.
It was broken, yeah. So Jacobson couldn't send the message anyway. It went nowhere.
But as Jacobson is listening to this red-haired man, he notices something else on the deck of the Deering. Something that, to a sailor, is much more horrifying than a broken radio or lost anchors.
Jacobson observes the general crew of the Deering casually, quote, milling around on the quarterdeck.
Which, to a layman like me, sounds completely innocuous. Oh, the crew's just hanging out. But you need to explain the physical layout of a ship and the cultural weight of the quarterdeck to understand why this is a nightmare scenario.
Okay, yes. To a seasoned mariner like Captain Jacobson, seeing the crew milling about the quarterdeck is a glaring, blaring siren that authority has completely violently collapsed.
Why is that?
The quarterdeck is the raised deck area usually located toward the stern, behind the mainmast. Historically, practically, and legally, it is the captain's sanctuary.
Oh, I see.
It is the command center of the vessel. This is where the ship's wheel is located, where the binnacle holding the compass sits, and where the officers pace while making navigational decisions.
So it's off limits.
Ordinary crew members are strictly, unequivocally forbidden from entering the quarterdeck unless they are explicitly ordered there by an officer to perform a specific task, like taking a turn at the wheel.
So it's not just a break room. It's like finding the junior mailroom interns with their feet kicked up on the CEO's desk, smoking the CEO's cigars, while the CEO is nowhere to be found.
Exactly. Or like a private wandering into the general's war room. It represents a total, unapologetic breakdown of nautical hierarchy.
Wow.
For the crew to be casually milling around on the quarterdeck without an officer screaming at them to get down strongly hints that Captain Wormel was no longer in command.
In fact, given McClellan's threats, it strongly suggests Wormel was no longer alive.
It is the visual signature, the undeniable fingerprint of a successful mutiny.
So a random red-haired man speaks for the ship, the crew has essentially conquered the captain's sanctuary, and they sail away from the lightship, disappearing back into the mist.
The very next day, January 29th, is the final time the Carroll A. Deering is ever seen afloat.
What happened?
The crew of another passing vessel spots the massive schooner sailing on a course that would take it directly, unavoidably, into the treacherous Diamond Shoals.
The Diamond Shoals are the very reason the area is called the Graveyard of the Atlantic. It is a terrifying maze of shifting, submerged sandbars where the warm Gulf Stream violently collides with the freezing Labrador Current.
Right. It is a navigational death trap. But the passing vessel doesn't hail them. They don't send up a warning flare.
Why not?
Because they look at this massive, competent-looking ship, and they assume, naturally, that the Deering's crew knows exactly where they are.
They assume the crew will spot the towering, candy-striped Cape Hatteras lighthouse or the nearby Diamond Shoals lightship, and they will simply turn the massive wooden wheel to avoid the wreck.
It's basic human self-preservation.
Right.
But as the passing sailors watch the Deering glide by, they notice something deeply eerie. There is no one visible on the decks.
No one.
Not a single soul is walking the planks or adjusting the rigging.
The dramatic irony of this moment is absolutely suffocating. The crew of that passing ship assumes everything is fine, relying on the standard expectation that a ship is being steered by men who want to live.
But we, looking back through the lens of history, realize the creeping, inevitable dread of the situation.
We know what that passing ship didn't.
Right. There might not have been anyone left alive on the Deering. Or if there was a mutinous crew cowering below decks, they had no one capable of navigating the ship away from the shoals.
Because they killed the only man who could.
The ship is just a massive, silent, 2,000-ton wooden missile, driven by the wind, heading straight for a graveyard.
It is the terrifying transition from psychological suspense, the mudded threats in Barbados, the strange rule-breaking behavior at the lightship, to impending, unavoidable physical destruction.
Yeah, the human element has entirely failed. And now the brutal, uncaring elements of nature are about to take over and wipe the slate clean.
The human element on the Deering had completely collapsed, but unfortunately for whoever might have still been on board, the ocean was about to finish the job in the most violent way imaginable.
Dawn breaks on January 31st, 1921. We are back where we started. Surfman C.P. Brady of the United States Coast Guard is on lookout duty at Cape Hatteras.
He spots the massive silhouette in the gloom.
The Deering is hard aground on the outer edge of Diamond Shoals. All 5 masts are up. The sails are fully set, catching the full, terrifying force of a hurricane-level gale.
Which is basically acting like a giant hand, driving the wooden hull deeper and deeper into the suffocating sandbank.
The ship is being battered, lifted, and slammed down by mountain-high surf.
And here we encounter the sheer agony of nature's indifference. The Coast Guard sees the ship. They know, logically, that there might be injured, terrified men trapped out there in the hull, freezing to death.
Right. They launch their motorized surf boats, desperate to attempt a rescue.
But the weather is so exceptionally historically violent that the rescue ships simply cannot approach the vessel. The surf is too high, it would flip the rescue boats instantly.
For days, these brave Coast Guardsmen have to stand on the freezing shore and watch this majestic, dying ship be pounded to splinters by the ocean, completely helpless to intervene.
I cannot imagine the psychological torture of watching that.
It takes until February 4th, 4 agonizing, freezing days later, for the weather to finally break enough for a Coast Guard boarding party to reach the ship.
And I want to treat this moment like exploring a haunted house.
Oh, absolutely. Because the details of what they found when they finally climbed aboard are burned into maritime history.
Walk us through it.
They pull up to the hull. They climb up the groaning, battered wooden side of the ship, stepping onto a deck that is tilted and splintering. And they find total, absolute abandonment.
They search the cabins, the hold, the quarterdeck. Not a single living soul is on board.
Nor are there any bodies.
Right.
But the physical trauma to the ship tells a very specific, very confusing story. They immediately examine the steering equipment, trying to figure out what happened.
And then
It's completely ruined. The massive wooden steering wheel, the one that requires multiple men to turn in rough weather, is shattered to pieces.
wow.
The binnacle box, which is the protective housing that holds the ship's vital compass, is smashed completely in. And the ship's massive rudder has been violently disengaged from its stock, swinging uselessly in the surf.
And it's not just what is broken, it's what is conspicuously missing. The boarding party realizes the ship's official logbook is gone.
Right, the expensive, crucial navigation equipment, the sextants, the chronometers, are gone.
All of the crew's personal effects, their clothes, their sea bags, their cherished belongings are completely gone.
And most importantly, they look at the davits on the side of the ship and realize the ship's 2 wooden lifeboats have been lowered and are missing.
And yet, amidst this scene of what appears to be a calculated, orderly evacuation and violent destruction, they step into the ship's galley, the kitchen, and they find the most eerie, unsettling detail of all.
The food?
Yes, they walk into the galley and find certain foodstuffs laid out on the counters, mid-preparation. Spare ribs were soaking in a pan, coffee was sitting on the stove.
It appeared that someone was in the middle of preparing the next day's meal at the exact moment the ship was abandoned.
Let's play detective here, because this crime scene is full of contradictions. We have evidence of an incredibly orderly evacuation. They packed their heavy sea bags, they grabbed the official logbooks, they carefully took the delicate navigation gear, they managed to lower 2 heavy lifeboats into the water.
You do not do that in a blind, screaming panic while a ship is sinking. That takes time and coordination.
But then you have the incredible violence done to the steering column and a meal left half-cooked. So let me ask you, was the wheel shattered because the ship slammed so violently into the shoals that the force traveled up the rudder and blew it apart?
Or was that wheel deliberately, maliciously smashed with an axe by a mutinous crew to hide their tracks, to ensure the ship would wreck and destroy the evidence of what they'd done to the captain?
That specific question is the central forensic debate of the Deering mystery. Both answers are terrifying.
Yeah.
A 2,000-ton ship grounding on hard sand shoals and hurricane winds will suffer immense catastrophic structural trauma. The rudder being violently disengaged from its stock could absolutely be the result of the ship's slamming bottom.
That impact sends a massive kinetic shock wave right up the steering column, which can easily shatter a wooden wheel and smash the binnacle. It's entirely plausible from a physics standpoint.
However, taking the ship's logs and the navigation equipment implies foresight and guilt.
Mutineers would absolutely need that navigation equipment to guide the lifeboats to a specific shore, and they would absolutely need the logbook destroyed or hidden.
Right, because the logbook would contain Wormel's official entries detailing McClellan's threats and the crew's insubordination.
You have to destroy the paper trail if you want to get away with murder.
I want to pause here just to force us to imagine the sheer terror of that final moment of abandonment, regardless of what caused it. Put yourself in their shoes.
Okay.
You are standing on a groaning, splintering wooden deck in the pitch black of a January night. You are facing mountain-high, freezing waves. The wind is screaming so loud you can't hear the man next to you.
It's terrifying.
And you look at this massive 250-foot wooden ship your home, and you realize your only option for survival is to lower a tiny, fragile, open wooden rowboat into that freezing, violent abyss and climb down into it.
The absolute soul-crushing desperation it takes to look at that raging ocean and say the tiny rowboat is safer than this giant ship is just unfathomable.
It implies a situation aboard the ship that was perceived as vastly more dangerous than a hurricane. Whether that danger was the very real fear of the ship breaking apart beneath their feet at any second, or the violent, bloody culmination of a mutiny where men were fleeing a crime scene, the result is the exact same.
12 men climbed into tiny wooden boats and vanished completely into the Atlantic.
And just as the trail goes completely cold, just as the ocean seems to have swallowed all the answers and all the bodies,
a miracle piece of evidence washes ashore. It's the kind of thing you only see in movies, and it provides a transition into the massive government investigations that follow.
But it also reveals a deeply twisted, frankly disgusting psychological side story.
Yes, this is where human opportunism and cruelty inject themselves into a genuine, agonizing tragedy.
It is April 11th, 1921, a few months after the wreck was discovered. A local North Carolina fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray is walking the beach in Buxton near Cape Hatteras.
He claims he spots a bottle floating in the surf, corked and sealed. He opens it, finds a note inside, and turns it over to the authorities.
And you have the exact text, right?
I do. I'm going to read the exact text of this message, because when this hit the newspapers, it sent absolute shockwaves of terror through the country. The note read, "Deering captured by oil-burning boat," something like chaser. "Taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Finder, please notify headquarters Deering."
When you look at how this hoax was constructed, you have to admit it was an incredibly convincing illusion of truth at first glance.
Oh, absolutely. The authorities took it incredibly seriously. It wasn't immediately dismissed as a crank.
They took it so seriously that government agents traveled to Captain Wormel's grieving widow and showed her the note.
Which is brutal. And she looked at it and positively identified the handwriting.
Yeah.
She swore it belonged to the ship's engineer, Henry Bates, which is the only man her husband had said he trusted back in Rio.
Furthermore, the authorities examined the glass bottle itself, and it was proven by manufacturers to have been made in Brazil.
And the Deering had just come from Brazil.
And to add fuel to the fire, the note seemingly corroborated a strange, unresolved sighting from weeks earlier.
Right. Remember Captain Jacobson on the Cape Lookout lightship? The man who saw the red-haired guy with the megaphone. Shortly after the Deering passed him, Jacobson noted that a quote-unquote mysterious motorized steamer had passed by on the same route. Jacobson had tried to hail the steamer to relay the Deering's message about the lost anchors, but the steamer refused to answer.
Even more suspiciously, the crew of the steamer had physically unfurled a large canvas tarp to deliberately cover their ship's nameplate, hiding their identity.
So you have a matching handwriting identification from the widow, a verified Brazilian bottle, and a mysterious identity-hiding ship that was in the exact area at the exact time.
The newspapers go absolutely wild. The headlines are screaming about pirates, hijackers, and Bolsheviks stealing American ships.
But then, thankfully, the hysteria cools down and critical skepticism kicks in. And the unraveling of this hoax is a fascinating look at basic logic.
Yes, critical thinking begins to poke massive holes in the narrative. Well, the government investigators sit down and ask a very logical, psychological question. If a crew member is hiding for his life in the bowels of a ship that is currently being violently overrun by armed pirates, and he miraculously gets his hands on a piece of paper, a pen, and an empty bottle, and he manages to scribble out a desperate final plea to the world.
Yeah.
Why on earth would his dying request be, please notify the company headquarters?
Exactly. Why wouldn't he write, call the Coast Guard, or call the police, or tell my wife I love her?
Tell my corporate boss I'm being kidnapped is a completely bizarre final thought for a man about to be murdered.
It sounds like someone trying to sound official, rather than someone who is terrified.
Precisely. So rather than relying on a traumatized widow, they bring in federal handwriting experts from Washington.
And these experts perform a much more rigorous scientific analysis of the penmanship. They compare it to actual letters written by Henry Bates, and they conclusively determine the message is an absolute forgery.
So federal agents then brutally interrogate the fisherman, Christopher Columbus Gray. Under pressure, Gray breaks down and finally confesses to faking the entire thing.
So we have to look at the psychology here. How did a random fisherman in North Carolina perfectly forge an engineer's handwriting well enough to fool that man's grieving widow?
I don't think he did. I think the darker truth here is that it just perfectly illustrates the tragic psychology of grief.
I agree. I don't think it was a perfect forgery. I think Wormel's widow wanted any answer, even a terrifying story about pirates and handcuffs, over the unending, silent torture of simply not knowing how her husband died.
The void of not knowing is worse than knowing he was murdered.
The psychology of grief absolutely blinded her. When people are denied closure, especially in disappearances, their minds will latch on to any narrative that provides a definitive end, however gruesome.
But if we look at the fisherman, Christopher Columbus Gray's motivation, it is incredibly dark, petty, and callous.
What was it? Why did he do it?
He didn't forge this note for international fame, and he wasn't trying to extort money from the Deering Company. He confessed that he forged a story about a violent pirate attack simply to discredit the local lighthouse staff.
Are you kidding me?
No, he wanted to make them look incompetent for missing a pirate attack right off their shores, hoping the ensuing government scandal would get them fired, which would allow him to swoop in and steal a government job at the Cape Hatteras Light Station.
It is sickening. He used the presumed horrific deaths of 12 real men as a creative writing exercise to fluff his resume.
But with the bottle exposed as a complete lie, the true mystery remains wide open, and the United States government realizes they have a major, terrifying problem on their hands.
Right. An American commercial vessel has washed up empty, and no one knows why. This brings the full weight of the federal government into the picture.
The sheer scale of the panic this ghost ship caused at the highest levels of government cannot be overstated. This wasn't a local Coast Guard matter anymore.
5 separate United States government departments mobilized to investigate this single shipwreck. The Department of Commerce, the Treasury, the Department of Justice, the Navy, and the State Department.
They are so concerned that they put Lawrence Ritchie, the trusted assistant to the Secretary of Commerce, who happened to be future President Herbert Hoover, in charge of coordinating the massive investigation.
And they start floating theories. Let's explore the deep political paranoia of the 1920s, starting with Theory 1, Bolsheviks and pirates.
You really have to view this theory through the specific historical lens of the era. The year is 1921. The first Red Scare is in full swing following the violent Russian Revolution.
Right. There is immense political paranoia gripping the United States regarding communist infiltrators, violent labor strikes, and anarchist bombings.
And piracy, while largely diminished from the romanticized golden age of pirates, was still a very real documented fear. Captain O.W. Parker of the U.S. Marine Shipping Board goes on the official record stating that piracy, without a doubt, still exists along the Atlantic coast.
And hardline anti-communists and the federal government lean hard into this. Around the same time, during a massive police raid on the headquarters of the United Russian Workers' Party in New York City, police allegedly find propaganda and papers calling on communist sympathizers and union members to violently seize American commercial ships and sail them to the Soviet Union to aid the revolution.
So the public and the government connect these dots and think, the Deering wasn't wrecked by a storm, it was hijacked by communist sympathizers who murdered the capitalist captain.
Then there is the Prohibition angle, the rum runner theory. The United States is deep into Prohibition.
The Deering was a huge ship. Its massive cargo holds could hold roughly $1 million worth of illegal Bahamian liquor.
Some prominent theorists argue that ruthless bootleggers operating out of the Caribbean hijacked the ship, intending to use its massive cargo space for smuggling operations along the coast, and they silenced the crew to do it.
I love looking at historical conspiracy theories, but we have to tear this one down. Why does the rum runner theory fall completely apart when you actually look at the mechanics of the ship?
It falls apart on purely practical, physical grounds.
Yeah.
A five-masted schooner is enormous, it relies entirely on the wind, and compared to the motorized speedboats of the era, it is incredibly slow and unmaneuverable.
It is also extremely conspicuous. You can see it coming for miles. Furthermore, it requires a massive, highly skilled crew just to raise the sails.
If you are a rum runner whose entire business model relies on speed, stealth, and sneaking illegal liquor past armed Coast Guard cutters in the dead of night, a giant, slow, wooden sailing ship is the absolute last vessel you want.
It's the equivalent of trying to use a city bus as a getaway car in a bank robbery.
Exactly. Okay, so if it's not communist hijackers and it's not bootleggers stealing the ship, the investigators move to Theory 2, which expands the lens from the ship itself to the region of the ocean it was sailing in.
It's the early genesis of the Bermuda Triangle. Now, in 1921, the term Bermuda Triangle wouldn't be invented for another 40 years, but the deep, superstitious dread of that specific region of the Atlantic was already very real.
And that dread was heavily fueled by the disappearance of the USS Cyclops. Just 3 years prior to the Deering incident, in 1918, the Cyclops, a massive 500-foot steel Navy collier, disappeared without a single trace.
What makes it relevant is that the Cyclops was sailing a remarkably similar route, departing from Brazil, stopping in Barbados, and heading up the U.S. coast.
It vanished with over 300 people aboard and 10,000 tons of manganese ore. There was no distress signal, no wreckage, no bodies. It just ceased to exist.
So when the Deering goes ghost on a nearly identical route, Brazil, Barbados, vanishing off the Carolinas, people start connecting the dots. They start whispering about magnetic anomalies, sea monsters, and cursed waters.
It heavily feeds into the lore of the triangle. But as fascinating as that is, if we pull away from the supernatural and the paranormal, we land on Theory 3, which is the most human and therefore the most disturbing horror of all, the mutiny.
If we look at the actual evidence, we have to bring it back to First Mate McClellan's drunken, explicit threat in Barbados. I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk, I will.
We have to bring it back to the mysterious red-haired man shouting from the Deering at the lightship, entirely bypassing protocol. And we have to bring it back to the crew illegally and casually occupying the quarterdeck, the captain's sacred domain.
It is by far the most compelling narrative because it tracks with human nature. The pressure cooker explodes, the crew finally snaps.
McClellan, or maybe someone else, brutally kills Captain Wormel and throws him overboard. But then, in the bloody aftermath, they realize the fatal flaw in their improvised plan.
Without Wormel, and maybe without McClellan if he was injured or killed in the struggle, they don't have anyone who can accurately navigate a five-masted schooner through the most dangerous waters on the eastern seaboard.
They are flying blind. They hit the Diamond Shoals. The ship violently grinds to a halt. They panic. They pack their bags. They smash the steering column and binnacle with axes to hide any evidence of the struggle or their navigational incompetence. And they abandon ship and the lifeboats, only to be swallowed by the massive storm they didn't see coming.
It is a strong theory because it perfectly accounts for the psychological buildup, the documented threats, the incredibly strange behavior at the Cape Lookout lightship, and the missing navigational gear.
But it competes directly with Theory 4, which I call the rational horror. This theory strips away the malice, the murder, and the intrigue, focusing entirely on the brutally indifferent power of the weather.
This theory comes from Coast Guard Captain R.L. Gaskill, the veteran who first spotted the Deering aground on the shoals. He looked at all the government investigations, all the piracy and mutiny theories, and he called it all newspaper bunk.
His thesis is so grounded in logic, yet it is devastatingly bleak. Walk us through his argument.
Gaskill's theory relies on the sheer, verifiable terror of a maritime hurricane. His thesis is this. The ship gets stuck on the outer sandbar of the Diamond Shoals, perhaps due to a navigational error by a half-blind captain, or simply bad luck with the shifting sands.
Once stuck, the weather turns catastrophic. The winds are screaming at 90 miles per hour. The massive ship is violently slamming against the hard ocean floor, with every wave groaning and breaking apart.
The crew realizes the ship will not survive the night. They make a calculated, desperate choice to abandon it. They gather their personal belongings, they grab the navigation gear because they will need it to find their way to shore in the lifeboats. They lower those two small wooden boats into a churning, chaotic sea, and they attempt a suicidal 9-mile row to the coast.
But the ocean, immense and powerful, simply swallows those tiny boats whole. They drown in the dark.
And Gaskill brings receipts to back this up. He points out that the Deering wasn't the only massive ship to vanish in that exact same weather system.
The Hewitts, a massive steel sulfur freighter, disappeared entirely during that same storm. An Italian vessel, the Monte San Michele, vanished without a trace in the same waters at the same time.
The weather was undeniably, historically catastrophic. It wasn't just a bad storm. It was a ship killer.
Gaskill's theory is compelling because it elegantly and simply explains the missing lifeboats, the missing crew, the missing Pringle effects, and the missing logs. Evacuating a sinking ship with your logs and navigation tools is standard operating procedure.
You don't need a mutiny to explain why a crew would flee a ship that is being pounded to death on a sandbar in a hurricane.
But here's where my brain gets stuck, and where this mystery refuses to cleanly die. Gaskill's weather theory explains the wreck, yes. It explains why they might abandon ship, but it completely ignores the weeks leading up to it.
It doesn't explain the mutinous behavior at Cape Lookout days before the wreck. It doesn't explain the foreign man on the megaphone or the crew swarming the captain's quarterdeck while the ship was still perfectly seaworthy.
So if we synthesize all of this data, was it a mutiny that was suddenly violently interrupted by a hurricane?
That is, in my opinion, the most terrifying synthesis of all. It's a collision of human malice and natural wrath. A resentful, exhausted crew commits the ultimate maritime crime. They seize the ship, they murder their officers, they throw the bodies to the sharks, and they think they have won their freedom.
They're the masters of their own destiny.
And then they sail directly into one of the most violent, unforgiving storms of the decade. Their stolen prize is ripped from their hands by the shoals, and they are forced to abandon it, fleeing into a freezing, roaring ocean that ultimately serves as their executioner.
They escaped the captain, but they couldn't escape the sea.
Which brings us to the physical aftermath of this incredible story.
Despite the Coast Guard cutter Manning's absolute best efforts to salvage the Deering, pulling on it with massive tow lines, the ship couldn't be saved. It was wedged too deep into the sand, and its hull was compromised.
So, in March of 1921, to prevent this massive wooden carcass from becoming a hidden, submerged hazard to other passing ships, the United States government towed massive amounts of dynamite out to the shoals.
They rigged the ship, and they blew the ghost ship to pieces, scattering its timbers across the Atlantic.
But the Carroll Deering refused to completely disappear. Its bones kept washing back up into the world of the living.
Massive parts of the ship's bow drifted ashore on Ocracoke Island, and local residents on Hatteras Island actually salvaged the heavy wooden timbers from the wreck that washed up on the beach.
They dragged them out of the surf and used those timbers to build houses.
I just want us to pause and think about the absolute haunting eeriness of that fact. Families, children, literally slept and lived their lives inside houses built from the ribs of a legendary ghost ship.
Decades later, the ocean still wasn't done with it. In 1955, the immense power of Hurricane Ione actually moved what was left of the heavy submerged hull another 9 miles across the ocean floor.
If you want to touch a piece of this history today, you can go to the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum in Hatteras and see the ship's massive brass bell and its capstan. sitting silently behind glass.
If we step back and look at the bigger picture, we have to ask why shipwreck stories like the Deering continue to grip our collective imagination so tightly after 100 years.
I believe it is because they represent the ultimate terrifying loss of control. We build these massive, complex machines. We chart the stars. We create rigid social hierarchies, maritime laws, and command structures to keep the chaos at bay.
But in the end, the ocean remains an undefeated, completely indifferent force. It doesn't care about our World War I heroes. It doesn't care about our drunken grievances, our mutinies, or our massive government investigations. It simply consumes everything we throw at it.
We always assume the story ends in the water. We assume the crew died, swallowed by those mountain-high waves of the Atlantic, their screams lost in the hurricane.
But the human mind always searches for the crack in the door.
If there really was a violent mutiny, and those men successfully packed their bags, took the navigation gear, and lowered those tiny lifeboats into the dark, what if they made it?
What if, against all impossible odds, they navigated those freezing waves?
What if they landed on some dark, isolated stretch of the Carolina coast, pulled the boats up into the marsh grass, and scattered into the night? It means that someone, somewhere, walked into a new town, started a new life, and lived out the rest of their natural days secretly carrying the bloodiest, most enduring mystery of the Atlantic in their head, never saying a word.